turn.
Thank you. I think I should introduce myself very briefly. So I'm Quentin Bolsee, or Quentin if you want to say it in French properly, but I'm used to Quentin. And I'm a PhD candidate at VUB, but also at ULB, because I'm doing a joint program. And actually, I have nothing to do with medical whatsoever. I'm an engineer, and my PhD is in artificial intelligence, so deep learning, in computer science, etc. So I'm really curious to have remarks about anything I would say that would not be correct from a medical point of view, because, you know, it was quite a challenge to accept to take this talk. But I'm eager to teach you some notions in deep learning, because that's my field. So first I will introduce the topic and the terms, because I think that's the most scary part, the words that we use. But you'll see it's really just words. After that, I will teach you a little bit of math, but just a teeny tiny bit. Don't be scared. So we're going to talk about what a signal even is, how we can collect quite a large amount to do some training to an AI. And after that, we're going to see some medical applications. So I only selected the state-of-the-art in this field. So it's papers from a few years ago, max. And it's going to be quite an interesting overview, I think. So let's proceed. What is deep learning? You probably heard of it quite a lot recently. But as I said, it's just a word. Let's see what's in there. There's deep and there's learning. So the deep notion is the idea that we're going to use a massive amount of data to train the AI. So it's not like we could train it on 5 examples. We're going to need millions of examples to train the artificial intelligence, okay? And the learning part is the revolution that we had around 10 years ago. We found out that we could indeed train based on millions of data samples. So it's, as I said, it's a form of artificial intelligence, and if you want my opinion, I think it's our safest bet as of now towards general artificial intelligence, but we're not there yet. So we only have artificial intelligence that is trained to do some very specific tasks, as you will see. So yeah, another subset of deep learning is neural networks, and this is what we will focus on. So why neural? Well, it's because it's inspired from the biological neurons. That's quite fascinating. I will explain the link between the two, but it was designed as kind of an artificial brain. It's not the case at all, but it mimics the way our neurons work. So we're going to focus on neural networks used in the deep learning context, okay? So we have this neural network here, we have data, and we have a result. And this is all it takes. Now, you just need to define what is the input and what's the output that you want. And as I said, there is a training part where we show new data to the neural network, and it learns based on that. And once it's ready, you can use it. And it's called the inference. So during training, you need millions of samples, as many as you can. And it's going to tune its parameters to produce the output that you desire. So this is where the feedback is present. So I would say our job as researchers is to find good data sets and to provide good feedback to the AI so that it can converge to a usable product. Once it has been trained, then you can simply show it one new data and you will get a result. Now, in this case, I was imagining a neural network that needs to classify cat pictures. So you show it a cat and it will tell you, oh, well, it's a cat. But as you see, it's not for sure. It's a probability. And that's the problem. During the inference stage, you have no guarantee whatsoever that the neural network is right. But we behave the same. We're not completely sure about our assertions. So in that way, it's not so different from us. But as I will explain, in the medical field, it's kind of a struggle because you want guarantees. You want to know who is responsible for the results. And so it's going to be very difficult with AI because there's always some uncertainty in the result. Another point is that this cat picture here, as you might guess, it needs to be quite similar to the ones you showed during training. If it's a very different cat, like a blue cat or something, it might confuse the neural network. So you really want your training data sets to contain as many diverse examples as possible. Okay, so the question is, what's going on inside of the neural network? Well, we don't know. We really don't know. The reason is there are millions of parameters in there. So it's way too many for us to start digging in the neural network and try to have some understanding. It's too much. We can't. The only thing we can do is have some intuition about how it works. And we found the following. So first of all, what it does is finding relationships in the data. So I showed you the cat. The cat example, well, there's going to be some relationship between this part and this part. Because if you have some whiskers, probably you have eyes a bit upper in the image, right? So it's going to look for those relationships in the data, and it's going to simplify them as much as possible. So we know for sure, we have research showing that what's going on inside of the neural network is a compressed representation of the data. And if you know a bit about neurology, you probably know that we assume that our brain behaves a little bit like that. That we compress information as much as possible, and it's only a highly efficient compression that is located physically in our brain at the end of the day. And that's how we can remember plenty of things. And we don't need billions of bytes as a computer would. We just need a few neurons because it's highly efficient. So that's the point. So it was successful in that regard, if we're trying to mimic how a brain works. Also, the performance, as I said, it's way higher when the data set is of good quality. So it needs to be representative of actual data that you're going to use later on, and it needs to be as diverse as possible. And this is always a struggle. Quite often you will see magnificent numbers when measuring the performance of the neural network during training, but when you apply it, it fails completely because the new data was different. So, you know, it's really tricky, and a lot of researchers are not completely honest about those numbers because there is no way they could test it on all possible examples. And so in practice, you might have some surprises. Another thing that we found is that only the relevant parts of the data are processed. So that's quite fascinating. This one was a neural network that needs to recognize the type of image. And it says here that it's classified as a dome. It's a building. And only those pixels contributed highly to the result. So this part, we have some positive research on that. We can really attribute some attention score to pixels in the image. And we see that it very efficiently learns to ignore irrelevant parts of the image. That's why it's so efficient. Okay, now bear with me for a second because we're going to have some math. But I assure you it's nothing scary at all. I just need to define a few terms. So if you want to look smart, instead of saying you're going to give a number, you can say it's a scalar. A scalar is a single number. So 0.3 is a scalar. Okay? When you have several numbers, it forms a vector. So here I gave the example, the height of a patient over time. You have a few samples because you're going to measure that once in a while, and it forms a vector. because you have a collection of values. Then you have a matrix. And the most familiar form of matrix that we use every day is an image. Because in the image, you have, again, a collection of values. But they are not in a one-dimensional axis. It's two-dimensional. So if I take the vector here, you can only go left and right because you have the time axis, but it's the only axis. There's no second one. If you have an image, then there are two axes, the horizontal and the vertical directions. So it's a two-dimensional data type. And then we have tensors, and that's where we say, okay, whatever. We're not going to find other words for more dimensions than that. So anything more than 3 dimensions included, it's going to be called a tensor. An example of a 3D tensor, you know it quite well. It would be a scan, so MRI scan. That's a 3D tensor because it's a bunch of little cubes. They're called voxels. And together they form a 3D representation. So it's a bit like an image stacked on top of another image, etc., etc. It's plenty of images, and together we see them as a single 3D volume. So for each of these, there are neural networks. Now, how could we possibly filter this signal to extract some meaningful information? Well, there are plenty of ways, but I wanted to be efficient here and show you only one of the most used, if not the most. It's a convolution. So if you have a convolution, you're going to need a filter, and you're going to need a signal. So here is a vector signal. As you can see, it's 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. By convolving it with this filter, I get a new signal. And what is different about this new signal? Well, it's a little bit smoother because it was 0, 0, 0, and then suddenly it goes to 1. But now it's going smoothly to 1. So it has been smoothed. So this is a smoothing filter. If you want to be smart, you can call it a kernel. It's a German word, and we use it a lot in math because, you know, it looks smart. But it's just a filter. So that was for a one-dimensional signal. I called it a vector. If you recall, there was another name for higher dimensional data. So if we go to 2 dimensions, like an image, we're going to need a convolution defined for images. And it perfectly exists, and actually it's the same concept. So you had the data and the filter. Here the data is an image, and the filter is also an image. It's a tiny image. Okay? Now, if you convolve it, you're going to get another image. And this image is going to be different in a sort of way. It depends really on what the filter is. So you see those numbers, 0, 1, 2, 2, 2, 0. Those are the kernel coefficients. It's the numbers that are encoded in the kernel. So if you guessed right, then this is the AI part. The numbers in this kernel, depending on their value, they have a given effect. And if you change them a bit, then it's going to improve the performance, perhaps. So a convolutional neural network is really just a collection of filters like that. And the numbers in these filters need to be learned during the training process. Okay, so this is an example that you will see in research papers if you look in the field. And it shows you how the image is processed to get a result. So here we start with the image itself. Then we convolve it. And then we convolve it again here. And at the end, we get, there are a few steps here that I will skip over, but in the end, once you've convolved the image a number of times, you get a meaningful result. So here it wanted to identify whether it's a car, truck, or a bicycle. So through these convolution operations, we can get a result. Another part that I didn't mention before is the activation function. So you see some functions here that are inserted every time you do convolution. Right after it, we will go through the activation function. And the reason is we wanted to imitate neurons, right? Well, neurons have a saturation phenomenon. If you try to activate a neuron too much, it's not gonna follow a proportional relationship. At some point, it will saturate, and you cannot activate it more than that. And that's what we were trying to mimic here with the sigmoid activation function. This is really inspired from biology. But over the years, we simplified it a bit, and now we just use this ReLU. So it goes from 0 to a straight line. So every time you see a ReLU, there was an activation function. And this is to mimic, again, this is to mimic the saturation of the neurons. Okay? So now we need to train it, and I'm going to be real quick here. You have your millions of training images. You pass them to the model, you get a result, and then you give some feedback to the network because you want to know whether the output was good or not. If it was a classification model, and if it tells you that the cat is a dog, then you can say, well, no, it's wrong. So I'm going to assign a high penalty to you because you got it wrong. Okay? So it's very important in this research field to define a good loss function. A loss function is simply a number that tells you whether the performance is good or not. So if it's a high value, you get bad results. If it's a low value, it means the performance is good. Okay? So in this case, if it guessed perfectly that it was a cat, then the loss function would be 0 because it's correct. Now, because during the training sequence, we know whether it's really a cat or not, we can provide the feedback, and we can change the values a little bit. The values in the neural network, we can change them, optimize them, and hopefully we decrease the loss function to get it more right. So this is for supervised learning. It's supervised by who? Well, by us, because when we made the data set, we knew whether the cat was really a cat or a dog. So we have the truth, the ground truth, we call it. The problem is that these labeled data sets, they take a lot of effort to make. As you can guess, some human needs to manually collect the images and classify them as cat or not. It takes a lot of effort. So there's a new research field which is unsupervised learning, and there we don't even provide labels, and we get quite creative with the training procedure. Okay, so in medical applications, what can we do? Well, almost anything. As long as you represent it as data, then we can process it in one way or another. So for imaging, it's a very natural application for neural networks, for convolutional neural networks in particular. So we can do some things like automated segmentation, where we detect some organs automatically. Then we have signal enhancement. I will show you some examples. So if the quality of the scan is not good at all, then a neural network can help. For clinical applications, we can map a list of symptoms and data about the patient to a diagnosis. So this is very exciting for the future because it might really help common doctors to get a diagnosis. It doesn't replace them at all because you need a guarantee. You need someone to check these results, of course, to supervise it. But it's gonna be a helping hand, let's say. Then you have disease prediction in the future based on the current data of the patient. That would be quite interesting. And then this is quite insane, in my opinion. You have drug discovery. So it turns out that the most difficult part in drug design is to compute the protein folding because they have so many molecules, among the thousands, I think. And so this part, there's no way to do it ourselves. Even a computer can't quite do it. So we ask a neural network to, instead of doing it based on laws of physics, it does it based on some sort of learned intuition. And it works. It works quite well, and one day we might have some design make test simulation within the neural network. So what it means is we design the drug, we simulate making it, but we don't really do it. And we test it on a patient, but again, we don't really do it. It's all a simulation. So normally this takes years. It could take a few minutes if you are successful in this. Okay. Yeah, I have to be a bit faster. So this is where I show you examples for each interesting field that I found. So this paper was made in 2018, and they helped doctors isolate the relevant parts of the image in MR scans. So as you can see in the training phase, they had some clues about which part of the image is important. You see all the white portion here. This tells the neural network that this was the important part of the image. And it trains based on that. And once you use it on new data, well, it works pretty well. And you get automatically an isolated region in the image. And what was interesting here is that it can collaborate with the doctor. Like you can add some part to the region, and it will self-correct. So if you want to do that on 3D scans, it's entirely possible because, as I said, a 3D data is simply images stacked on top of each other. It's a different type of data. It has one more dimensions, but there also exist convolutions for 3D data. I mentioned 1D and 2D, but you can perfectly generalize convolutions to 3D. But it takes quite a lot more work for the computer, obviously, because the filters are now little cubes in 3D, and instead of 1 million, it might be 100 million parameters to learn. So it's still a new area because we need quite powerful computers for that. But as you can see, you get you have the 3D volume here, so the raw result of the scan. Here it was a CT scan, and then it's convolved by the 3D neural network, and you get a classification for each voxel in the data. So it can differentiate arteries, veins, the pancreas, etc. So I think that's quite useful because this would be a horrible task for a human to click on the pixels and isolate the relevant areas. But here, in a matter of minutes or even seconds, you get the different parts of the user, of the patient, and they are completely isolated. And as I said, yeah, it's quite accurate. Here it's 80% accuracy on the classification of the voxels. Next, yeah. So this is noise removal. This is very close to what I do in my research. You have a noisy signal. As you can see, it's bad quality because you have artifacts. Here it's a low-dose CT scan. And the hope is to process it to get as close as possible to a normal dose. Well, we have here a neural network that does it quite well. As you can see, it processes this data and produces this. So there are almost no artifacts left in the result. And one important mention here, it didn't just use a mathematical optimization, there was also a perceptual optimization. This is to make sure that the result is not only good mathematically, but it looks good to the user. There are no disturbing artifacts, like there could be a white pixel here in the middle. It was also trained to eliminate that from the noisy data. Okay, this is very topical. This is automated COVID-19 diagnosis based on a CT scan slice of the lungs, I think. Yeah. And so this one is quite interesting because it shows you can combine several neural networks, even ones that were trained or not trained. So in this case, you have the lung. We applied a segmentation network that isolates the lungs from the rest of the image. I showed you how it worked before. And then we have the rest of the network that assigns a probability of COVID-19. And yeah, I think this is, I still have two applications to show you. I'll be real quick. So this one, apparently liquid biopsy is very popular right now. And here we use it to detect cancer cells for lung cancer. So how it works? Well, we do the liquid biopsy and then we process it to a spectroscopy. We get a spectroscopy signal. It's a vector. It's just a vector because there's only one dimension, as you can see. We process it by a 1D convolutional neural network, and it can differentiate whether the exosomes were from a cancer cell or a healthy cell. We have 95% accuracy. So it's really quite interesting, and it's promising because we even found stage 1 patients. And then, okay, I don't have time left, but this one was how to detect mutagens within a molecule. And as you can see, it detected that this atom here was the cause for mutagen. So it shows you that you can even process molecules with a neural network as long as you convert them to text. Okay, well, yeah, I think this is all I wanted to mention. The rest is just future research. We're gonna have more powerful computers, so we're gonna be able to process more data, possibly the entire DNA at some point. We're very far from that currently. And the problem is that it's a black box, right? You don't know what's going on inside. So there is no guarantee for the doctor why this specific output was produced, and this is still a pretty big struggle. So at some point we hope to understand what was going on inside of the neural network, but it's too early for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.